to help, okay?
No problem. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this FA webinar that we've pulled together very quickly. Thank you to everybody who's registered. We're going to be talking over the next hour to possibly an hour and a quarter or so around supporting players' physical well-being and fitness during this social distance and isolation period. So a very hot topic, and I'm aware that many of you have experienced the challenges like we have over the last week to week and a half. Just to, right from the start, just to be very clear, we're not a group of medics. We're not talking about COVID-19 from a medical perspective, but what we hope to be discussing and hope that people are contributing to over the next hour and a quarter in the chat box is helping to support our players from a physical welfare and a physical fitness perspective, whether we're working in performance or the development side of the game, and whether it's the male or female game. What we're trying to do is have a discussion, share some ideas. We don't have all the answers. We're a group of people who this is quite a unique circumstance for as well. But I'm delighted to say that I've managed to, in the last 24 hours since we pulled this together, I've managed to gather a group of brains around me. They always say that you should be the stupidest person in the room, and in this room I certainly am. We've got Dawn Scott, who is back with the FA, having spent a long period of time with the US women's national team. Dawn is our senior physical performance coach. Hi, Dawn.
Hi, Matt. How are you doing?
Yeah, Dawn's on audio. She's not on video at the moment, but she is with us. I've also got Nick Allamby with us. Nick is currently the first team physical performance coach for Sunderland Football Club.
Hi, Matt.
Hi, Nick. And we've got Johnny Madden, but Johnny keeps dropping in and out of the webinar at the moment. So when we next see Johnny, I'll get Johnny to introduce himself. Dawn, do you just want to start? Give us a little bit about...
Hi, Matt.
Oh, there you are. You're back. Hi, Johnny. Do you want to give us... Dawn, do you want to just...
Hiya, can you hear us?
We can hear you loud and clear, Johnny. No problem.
Brilliant.
Dawn, do you want to give us a little bit about your background and your career today, where you've been and what you've been up to?
Yeah, no problems. Good evening, everybody. Various places around the country. Hope everybody's keeping safe and everything. I think just to reiterate what Matt said, we're definitely not given medical advice around kind of the situation of what's going on. It's to help if there's anything from a practical and more around communication and things like that. But in terms of my background, I've almost come full circle. I did sports science at Manchester Met, and then I did a master's in sports nutrition at Aberdeen University. I then worked at the FA with Hope Powell as manager for 10 years, from 2001 to 2010. 2010, I then moved out to the US and worked with the US women's football team for the last 10 years. Was lucky enough to work with that team across 3 World Cups. We got to the final of the first one in 2011, and then 2015 and 2019 World Cups, and then also supported the team at the 2012 Olympics in England and UK, where we won gold at Wembley. Also support the team at 2016 Olympics, where we got beaten in the quarterfinals against Sweden. And now very vocal goalkeeper came out and made some controversial statements after that match. And then in December last year, came back to the FA and now working with Phil Neville with the senior women's team as physical performance manager for the senior women.
Brilliant. But follow that one, Nick.
Some resume. I've had about 20 years now in professional football. Started at Middlesbrough, had 10 years there, and had a sort of on-the-job education and development period where I worked through the medical department all the way through to performance. Ended up being head of sports science there. Left there and did a little bit of freelance work for a year or so before I joined Bradford City down in League Two. And then had a very successful period with under Phil Parkinson, where we managed to stay in the league the first year we were there. Had an unbelievable period after that, where we got to the first League Two team to get to the what was then the League Cup final. It was, I can't remember it was sponsored by them, but the League Cup final. Got promotion the same year and continued to steadily progress. That led to us going across as a team to Bolton, where I took up the same position there, head of performance. Managed to get them promoted first year we were there, stayed in the league the second year, and then obviously had the well-publicised problems last year. Took up this position that I'm at now, which is physical performance coach at Sunderland in November. And I've had a pretty successful time so far, still sort of changing things around and doing things on the fly as we were. And up until the disruptions, looked like we could be heading towards a culmination of another successful season.
So after the time at Bolton, this situation's a breeze for you, Nick.
Yeah, that was challenging, to say the least. Challenging, but yeah, again, you always learn things from bad situations as well as good situations, and I'd had a lot of good years. And I mean, the year before that was very challenging, but very successful in the end when the aim was to stay in the league. But last year was doing your job and not getting paid for it was something that was entirely new to me, and a whole new set of problems that we had to work around with players and everything else. And again, you always learn from bad situations as well as good, don't you? So yeah, it was a challenging year, but we learned a lot from it.
Excellent. And hopefully we can all learn a lot from the situation that we're in at the moment. Johnny, are you with us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes. Just give us a bit of a resume of your career to date, mate.
Yeah, so I originally started, I studied sports science at John Moores back in 2005 to 2008, sport and exercise science, specialised in physiology. I moved back home with a view to saving money to go back to university to do my master's, where I was fortunate enough to gain an internship at Hull City Football Club, a hometown club, the sports science and strength and conditioning intern, and a joint collaboration with the university by where I was also going through the master's program at the same time. So I worked for a year under Nigel Pearson and under a performance staff led by Paul Balsam and Matt Reeves and Sean Rush, and gained some invaluable experience there amongst the first team as well as the academy. And then, like most sort of students that finish an internships, I wrote off and applied for numerous jobs really right across the country. And I was fortunate enough pre sort of EPPP boom, you know, with the jobs and everything else, that I was fortunate enough to get myself a role up at Middlesbrough, so another northeast connection. And from there, I started originally as the lead academy sports scientist under Peter Hood, and in a rather sort of small department. And then obviously, like I say, with the EPPP and growing, you know, many staff joined us at the club. I was then from there in around about 2013-14 when Aitor Karanka was appointed. I was asked to move into the first team environment as a senior sports scientist, predominantly working with the GPS and the monitoring of training. And I worked up in the first team up until recently, as last March, so a year ago now, is where I was appointed again back into the lead academy fitness and conditioning role. So now I'm overseeing a group of staff and responsible for the conditioning and the fitness of the day-to-day under 23 squad, but then obviously have wider commitments right through all the phases. And like I say, managing a group of staff that work tirelessly to deliver a sports science and S&C service right across the academy.
I think Matt's just.
I think we've lost Matty.
We've lost Matt. I hope it wasn't my resume that put him off.
Whoa.
Hey guys, it's Laura here. I'll try and step in and hold the fort while Matt tries to come back to the room. I don't know if you just want to give us a bit of an insight into maybe some of the experiences you faced over the last sort of 7 days and I guess the immediate reaction to the news coming through that football's going to be shut down, and I guess maybe some of the things that you guys have put in place over the last 7 days to share to the audience. I don't know, Nick, do you want to jump on that first?
Yeah, no problem. It was an absolute whirlwind, wasn't it? I mean, obviously everything was building up and we had an idea it was coming, but all you can do in the job, especially with the number of games that we have to deal with, is carry on as it was until you're told otherwise. So we were still preparing. Last Friday, we'd had a midweek game at Bristol, which we got through and we were coming towards having to go away again. So to Blackpool, and then so literally at 10 o'clock you've got everything in place for morning training, and it says there's going to be an announcement, so we just sort of put everything back for an hour or so and waited for the announcement, and then went from there. And we advised everybody to go home. Ours was a slightly different situation because the following game, so we had Blackpool and then we had a week to the following game, which was actually for us on the fixture list was Bury, so it was a free weekend. So we'd already put in stuff into place for a little bit of a break. We'd had a busy fixture period, so we put stuff into place for a little bit of a break at that point, so it didn't massively alter that first week as such. It was sort of the back end of that where we'd intended to go like 2 or 3 days off, then back into training. We just sort of changed that and extended that a little bit and sort of give them a little bit of training at home, and then went from there. But it's proving really difficult to plan for what you're doing, because originally it was going to be April the 3rd and then it's moved again. So we're sort of making adapting the training program for the players who are away day by day. And now we were looking at what May the 1st, they're saying, as the return date, which I'm unsure of.
Matt, what do you think?
Say that again, sorry. About in terms of when we're going to come back?
No, I was only messing because we lost you for a minute.
Okay, I'm here. Don't you worry. Johnny, what about yourself? What's it been like over the last 10 days or so for yourself?
Yeah, so we've sort of had a two-pronged approach really. So the under-9s to under-16s actually finished with us on the 13th of March. So we had an email to say that all evening sessions and all competitive fixtures were to be cancelled. And actually our under-23s and under-18s, so the PDP phase actually have worked up until last Friday. So we tried to keep them going as business as usual. Obviously, there were certain measures put into place to avoid the spread and trying to limit social contact. So we, in terms of the training ground setup and training times, they were all modified to help alleviate any issues potentially caused by having multiple players on site. And then so all players have. From under-9s upwards have all got programs, have all been directed towards sort of online resources, whether that's through the PMA or social media, in order to remain healthy and active. And again, as Nick was saying there, obviously the games program. I think the Premier League and the EFL have suggested that they're going to begin from the 30th, but and obviously they're anticipating the trainings to start no earlier than the 20th. But we're going to review this, and I think it's obviously on medical grounds, and obviously what public announcements are made within that time, so that we'll review this around about the 13th, with a view to making the necessary changes. But up until that point, like, as I say, players have all got home programs to be completing, which, like you say, staff have worked really hard to get in place in multi mediums. So, like I say, through PDFs, through social media, through online sort of official channels like the PMA, and that includes rehabilitation as well. Obviously, I think it's great keeping the fit players fit, but how do we return players that are currently injured to full training status and use this as an opportunity to get them back? So yeah, there's been quite a lot going on at the training ground in the last fortnight, to say the least.
Sure. Any update today in terms of obviously the guidance overnight, where now the kind of rules are stricter in terms of people not being in more than twos in public and things like that? Has that changed anything?
Well, like I said, for us, the first week was it's okay. The first week was easier for us to do because we were due a little bit of a break anyway. So we just extended that period. This week we were taking the guidelines of our club doctor, Glenn Ray, and up until last night, the guidelines were that you could train in small groups, no more than 5 people, should be spread between 2 meets and such as that. It's really difficult to do. So we decided on another period of home training to get through that. But obviously that all changes again now. And I think that when you're looking at it, you've got to be responsible with what you're doing and follow the government's guidelines, haven't you? So that will, going forward, I'll obviously change everything that you'd plan to do. The sort of small group thing goes out the window. You can't leave the homes. So it's a whole nother set of challenges.
Yeah. Johnny, for you as well?
Yeah, so as I said, we're looking to review sort of the training status of the players around about the 13th in potential preparation for the 20th. But, obviously the longer this goes on, the government guidelines, as Nick said there, they take precedent over anything. In relation to, obviously there's obviously a change in the thought as to how the actual virus is spread. So from being a contact and going into an airborne, obviously as Nick says, there's obviously certain parameters that you need to put in place to ensure that there's not, that follow the government guidelines in terms of the 2 meter rule and players being in close proximity to each other. So I think obviously we're guided again by the first team, and naturally the under-23 squad is that sort of go-between squad in terms of the PDP phase. So if there's the manager wants players to return as and when they do, well, we have to ensure that those players are able to step up and train and remain resilient and can perform. So at the moment, we're again just working day to day with the clubs, but as a club, should I say, and taking advice of the medics and through the official channels.
Yeah, great. Dawn, obviously no camp at the minute for you. You've just come off the back of one, but in terms of the female game and the people you've been speaking to, anything to add to what the guys have been talking about?
Yeah, I mean, our situation was quite interesting as well, because from the 1st to the I think it was the 12th. I've kind of lost track of dates now. We were out in the US at the She Believes tournament. So our doctor for the team, for the women's team, he did a great job of keeping in touch with the FA every day and then updating kind of the kind of management team around the England group in terms of what was happening. And even we actually traveled from Florida to New York to Dallas for our 3 matches. And there were kind of cases in New York and Orlando. And actually, after we left New York, they kind of shut down a little bit. So our doctor did a good job just around general hygiene and when we were traveling, because we were kind of traveling commercial flights. So again, it was just kind of educating the players to be smart in terms of their hygiene, just traveling in airports, on the plane. Simple things like wiping down tray tables, kind of armrests, that kind of stuff. So that was that. And then when we flew back from Dallas, we landed on the Thursday. So almost 2 weeks ago now, and that's when I think it was starting to kind of grow quite a bit. So basically, as soon as we got back and the players had kind of dispersed from the airport, I actually messaged the whole player group to say we're not sure what's going to happen, and just literally sent them a list of like kettlebell, dumbbell, that kind of basic stuff, and go on Amazon or somewhere similar and just get yourself a few bits of equipment, because we don't know what's going to happen. So at that stage they did, and luckily some of them are kind of self-sufficient at home. And then since then it's more been the England doctor and obviously the FA just giving updates, and then me just working with the clubs to help and support the Women's Super League clubs in terms of anything they might need for us to kind of support them because they're ultimately programming for the players, and just keeping in touch with the players from a mental perspective, that kind of thing. Just helping them out if they haven't got equipment. Can we try and help them get bits of equipment? So yeah, and then we've also got a few players rehabbing. So it was similar. I think initially they could go in individually to clubs and get some kind of rehab support, but I believe that's all shut down now. So even then it was a couple of players who can't run yet, didn't have a bike. So it's just trying to outsource. Can we get bikes for those players just so their rehab doesn't go backwards at this important time for them?
Sure. Just at this point, guys, I just want to mention that we are recording this webinar. So if like myself, where I disappeared from the room for a minute, or if any of you drop out or need to go run and look after your kids, we are recording this, and so it'll be available to you afterwards. There's also a chat column. There's some very familiar names of people appearing in the chat column, so it's great to see a lot of people. Hello to you all.
Yeah, I've seen a fair few names that I recognise as well, so definitely. Hi to the ones there. Hi to everybody. And
if you could use that chat column, because there's a lot of knowledge in this, not just in terms of the presenters, but there's a lot of knowledge in the webinar tonight. So anything that you either want to add in as a comment or a question that you want bringing up, then please use the chat column to do that. I've already seen somebody saying, can we get into a bit more detail about programming? Don't worry, that's coming in terms of some of the ideas that the guys have got around what players could be doing at home. We will try and get across various things, but we are quite a broad church tonight, and what we're hoping is that this webinar will be maybe an introduction to the topic, and then as the weeks and months, hopefully not too many months, but as the weeks and months progress, we might get into a bit more detail from some of the guys and some presentations, and maybe get some other people on as well. So if people think it's a good idea, then we can build on the back of this webinar as well. Just trying to read a comment from Paul there. Does the panel think that in light of the new government ruling and the fact the season may not start for such a long time, the guidance on physical activity is now really mental stimulus and not physical? Nick, do you want to take that one to start?
I think
at the moment we've still got, however, whether you think it's realistic or not, and I don't wish to be controversial, but at the moment we've still got a start date of April the 30th, May the 1st, whatever it may be. So until we're told otherwise, that's what we've got to prepare for. Yeah. How are you looking at that? They've just come through the majority of a season, and we've now got what is approximately 5 weeks, 6 weeks until that start date. So we're looking, as everybody else will be in professional football, at what do they need to do to be prepared from there to now with the restrictions that we've got in place. So while I agree that definitely the mental stimulation one is huge, and also that the fact that they're missing the interaction that they have every day with each other as teammates is a big thing. So things like WhatsApp groups where they're interacting on those types of things helps with that, but it doesn't fit in. But from our point of view as a performance staff up at Sunderland, that's the situation that we've got at the moment. That's the start date. I'm certain that things will develop all the time, but we're literally giving them training programs for a week, and if nothing's changed, we'll go into the next week's training. with the idea of having those 6 weeks planned to be ready to play.
And I think as much as the mental stimulation, I think it's mental wellness as well. So, you know, I think they're two different things. So even like, I know some female players are kind of just struggling mentally at the isolation, and some of them not either having family or other people there. So I think even, you know, like meditation apps or, you know, Headspace is an app. I don't know kind of how accessible, what the cost is, or I'm sure there's other free apps out there, but anything I think from a mental perspective. And, you know, things I've said to some of the players is, you know, keep yourself busy. And is it you're watching some of your technical clips or something like that, just so you keep engaged, and can you use this time to, I don't know, learn a language or, you know, something like that. Use time so you get something productive out of it rather than just going day to day and not really having a structure.
Brilliant. Yeah, great thoughts. Johnny, you had something to add to that as well, didn't you?
Yeah, I think obviously, you know, whilst I think we've sort of been considering what's the realistic terms of the academy games program actually recommencing. Obviously, Nick's mentioned there about the uncertainty about the first team schedule, and I would agree with, you know, what's said at the moment. Like I say, we'd worked on up until Friday, we'd worked on a business as usual. We'd been preparing for a game against Manchester United, and we brought players in after that, and we found it as a really to tie in sort of the mental side of it. We found it was a really good period actually for the PDP squads in particular to actually work together. So, you know, we talk about the FA model of the four corner model, and we were getting players training with each other that weren't used to training with each other. We were seeing sort of friendship groups and bonds that we haven't seen, you know, throughout the season so far, just because the squads tend to work it separately. And then, like you say, from a physical and technical and tactical perspective, you know, there was some really good ILP work going on with subgroups and positions, and we also it gave us the opportunity to work without the distractions of games. So yeah, from a mental well-being perspective, there was some really good work that was being done, and now, as you say, the challenge sort of turns to players. You know, we don't know how long this is going to go on for. You know, I've had messages from players asking us, you know, when are we going to go back in? When are we training? And yeah, that mental stimulation is really important. So at the moment, where, you know, that the content of our programs is looking like football training. It's looking like a periodized training week in terms of small areas, large areas, multi-focus, max velocity outputs. But the longer this goes on, in my opinion, and I'd be interested to hear what everyone else's thoughts are, is that we'll move towards more of a generalist model in terms of remaining physically active, almost like the introductory part of an off-season program, and we'll move towards that one. You know, obviously, as and when we get the idea that that the games program isn't going to commence, but as Nick said, up until that point, we'll continue to work as if we're expecting those games to start commencing the 30th.
Yeah, and I think there's a really important point there, isn't there, around how do we link the four corners into this? I know we're on a physical discussion tonight, but I think at this moment in time, we're really starting the social corner, and we're keeping connected with the players and keeping the players connected with each other. Have you kind of looked into that? And
I've just been reading a lot of the comments that have been coming up on the side there that people are on the webinar interacting with, and they're coming up with some great ideas. The sales stuff that we've all looked at. So I'd already mentioned about the WhatsApp group, but one of the main things is how do you monitor the work that you set for them when they're working on their own now. You're looking at it's difficult ways of doing it, but there's been ideas such as Strava and things like that, and then you get the motivational aspect added to it. where you can create clubs with a leaderboard and such as that. Every one of them has got an iPhone, so it's not like they say, I haven't got a Garmin watch, I haven't got this, that, and the other. Every one of them's got a phone that'll work off. So things like that are really good ideas for monitoring purposes, and also it gives them that social interaction. But the WhatsApp group, as it sort of developed at first, it was a little bit of, it's not going to bother us, it's not going to affect us. And then, what players are like, they're sometimes a little bit slow on the uptake with that type of thing as well, to realise that this is real and it is really serious. And now it's sort of hitting in, and they're realising that they can't come into work, they can't use the building, we're having to clear it, you're not allowed out of your house now. I think those sorts of social connections with them is huge. It's huge, which obviously then leads into the mental aspect that Dawn mentioned.
Dawn, anything else from you to add at this point?
No, because again, I guess our support is a bit different in that it's club led, and I'm kind of we're more here to support the practitioners in the clubs if they need anything. But then also, just keeping in touch. I think that mental piece of connection with the players, and whether it's a WhatsApp, like a WhatsApp message, or if it is a phone call. I think it's long days, and like Nick said, we don't know how long this is going to be. So I just think keeping that communication and connection, so that none of us are guilty of being in isolation and not being in touch with people, and just texting rather than either face to face, like video calls, or actual conversations. Because I think that's important, because just to reiterate, we don't know how long it's going to be. So if you suddenly shut down communication, you just text them for 3 weeks, it might sound weird, but it's then almost a social reintegration when we kind of get back to being in contact with people again.
Absolutely.
I just saw a player I used to work with, Guy Branston, brought up a great point about how you're monitoring them mentally. And he's talking about that from a mental point of view, as in, what we've been talking about is such upheaval for them, and players work off of routine. They just love the routine of every day coming in, meeting. That's their life, and the social interaction is the life. And the isolation part of it, something we'll really be struggling with. And there's no right or wrong answer in how you're dealing or how you're monitoring with it mentally, other than offering the
Evening, everyone. I don't know if you can hear me. We're obviously experiencing some technical difficulties. There are over 450 of you online this evening, which is the highest number of people we've had online. I don't know. Can any of the people online hear me? Dawn, are you still there? Nick, Johnny, anyone?
Yeah, I'm here.
Is that Johnny?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Cool, Johnny. I don't know if you've got anything to add on the last point for the people that are still engaged. I can only apologise for some of the technical challenges we're having this evening. Hopefully, we'll get everyone else back online as soon as possible. But Johnny, I guess there's a couple of questions actually come in terms of, we've just seen Italy go down to only being able to move within 200 metres of your house. What are your thoughts on how we might manage with the players in that environment if sort of the restrictions like that are brought in here? Yeah,
I mean, from some of the work that I've seen on social media platforms, this, very, very trivial, I know, but the toilet roll challenge. I mean, I've seen some of the coaches at different football clubs and sort of community foundations associated with football clubs starting to put videos online of how kids can manipulate a ball within the back garden. You know, so there's obviously like keep you up challenges. I saw a great video of a young lad that was playing a rebound pass and diving across the goal and practicing his saves down to the bottom corners. So I think creativity, you know, with kids, you know, particularly like say with the 9s to 16s that we're working with, you know, just getting them playing and physically active in the back garden. You know, some kids might have the opportunity to open back doors and work into the back gardens. You know, have something on the TV and use that space almost like a fitness studio. I think when it comes to obviously running and more sort of physical conditioning, you're probably looking more around the metabolic route, you know, in terms of circuits, in terms of body weight strength programming, and general mobility and flexibility, really, which is probably something you do more structured with all the players. However, you know, kids can be creative with different things. So I would, you know, I think those are the types of things that I've observed so far through social media and through the programs that we're trying to develop as well. So I hope that answers your question, Laura.
Yeah, no, I guess in terms of, I guess there's an element now of social well-being and just keeping players ticking over. What sort of time period do you think you would need with your players from, say, being able to come back in training to be able to be match fit again to start playing? And what might that period of time look like in terms of the work that you might do with some of the players? I guess it might be a mini pre-season in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, following I was reading earlier some of the emails from the Premier League and the EFL. So they've anticipated that no training earlier than the 20th of the month, and then the games to start back again on the 30th. So that gives you a 10-day window. Now, obviously, in that perspective, we know that there's almost different, I suppose, for a better word, decay rates of physical qualities. So, you know, it depends on what programming the players have worked with. You know, obviously there's research out there that suggests that sort of aerobic endurance can be maintained for 25 days. You know, with microdosing of sessions and physical work. You know, maximum velocity is probably the key one. You know, there's obviously a lot of literature around the vaccine effect of maximal sprint speed. So they suggest that, you know, sprinting every five to 7 days is enough. So again, you would suggest that given that type of time frame of 10 days, that players shouldn't need too much going back into it. Now, obviously, that's providing that players are currently working at the moment and have that baseline level of fitness. I've just reading through some of the comments, Laura, about you know, just wanted to pick up on a couple of points about just going back slightly to the mental well-being of mental scoring. I think that's you know, keeping in touch. We have to be conscious of treating the players and not only as numbers through a PMA app or through a spreadsheet or a Google Drive sheet. It's also being in touch with players over the phone as well. So just picking up on a couple of points there from a couple of the attendees.
No, brilliant. Thanks, Johnny, and thanks for helping us keep this going here while we try and get
no problem
back online. Definitely not my area of expertise, I must admit, but I'll do my best to keep the questions come in. I guess we'll open it up to you guys on the chat. You know, any particular questions? Johnny, obviously still online with us, and you know, an expert in his field. If you just want to take maybe a couple of minutes, fire some questions in on the chat, and we'll try and pick those up with Johnny. Well, I'm just getting through some.
Sorry, Laura,
go on.
Sorry, I'd just seen a comment there from Natasha, obviously asking about how would you encourage players to stay motivated. Now, obviously, again, you know, Natasha's looking at some great work there in terms of mini challenges on Twitter. You know, and I think obviously there is a heavy influence of social media these days on players, particularly young players. But how would you encourage them to be active and stay motivated? I think, you know, from some of the age groups that we have, the under 9s to 16s, it's the effect of not going to school as well. So, we look at the lack of PE curriculum, for example, and there's some great stuff there. I know Joe Wicks is doing the morning 9 o'clock PE lessons for kids and for families. I think that's a great way for people to stay active. And in terms of the mini challenges, I think again it's probably that use of role models of they'll see young players will see their idols doing work and trying to keep fit and remaining fit. So again, I think that sort of role model has a real importance to play, particularly when keeping players motivated at a young age.
Johnny, what's with the players that are maybe currently injured or receiving treatment? How have the club sort of been able to manage those in this period? I guess there might have been 2 different periods from up until the guidance last night, and it might be different moving forward. Any sort of guidance you can share on that for the people in the room?
Yeah, so we've currently got a couple of injured players who have been allocated to. It has just been sort of allocated to medical members of staff and rehab members of staff as a point of contact, and players have access to PDF files that they can access through WhatsApp and through their phones. We've also created videos as well. So each player has got their own sort of strength program or rehabilitation program sent to them that's direct to, it's on their phones ready to see. And we've also used the PMA as our sort of main data point at the club as well throughout recent years. So we've uploaded all of our programs and videos to that so that players and parents can access them. And then in terms of sorry, I was just going to say in terms of then the day-to-day contacts, we've sort of as a group of staff agreed to speak to the players once every 3 days. So on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, just to touch base. So again, we've divided the squad up between several members of full-time staff, and they will be responsible for checking in with the players, and then they'll report any issues to a central point. Should it be illness? Should it be, like say, struggling for motivation? If it's, hopefully it's not an injury, but, again, we just have a central point of contact, and that's typically the doctors that will then, if there is any medical issues, they can then get in touch with players.
Great. So, Dawn, I think you might be back connected by the telephone. Are you there?
Yeah, I am. Yeah. Sorry about that.
No problems. We're doing what we can. I guess from your experiences working with national teams, Dawn, when you haven't got access to, you're not with the players on a daily basis. What's your experiences in being able to update that communication with the players? So I guess people are in a similar experience now where you're not day to day with them. What can you share from your experiences working with national squads on that?
Yeah, I mean, when I worked in the US, we had a good system where, I mean, in essence, the US women's national team, like the US soccer, pretty much paid most of their contracts, and then the clubs kind of topped that up. So in some ways, they were first and foremost US soccer employees, and then kind of their club was almost secondary from an employer perspective and financially what they were paid. So in some ways, that gave us a bit more, if you like, control over the players. So actually, when the league in the US was created in, it was 8 years ago, so whatever that's 2012, 2013, we basically mandated that every club had to use the same wellness platform, the same strength and conditioning app. So we used Team Builder with the national team, with the league, and then also we had the same GPS system. So actually that meant that when the players were with club, they were on the same system, and when they were with national team, they were on the same system, so that when they were with national team, the clubs could see wellness, they could see the S&C, whether it was a strength session players were doing with us. Equally, they could see like GPS train load. So then when the players were then with their clubs, we could see from a national team what players were doing then. So in a lot of ways, it opened up communication between kind of club and national team was one first and foremost. There was a lot of education went on with the players in terms of, what that data meant. And, I do feel like this is also a good time with players, like, whether it is some kind of education session, especially through the younger pathways of, what is recovery, what is nutrition, or what is, the type of conditioning or fitness levels that are important for different levels, different positions, all that kind of stuff. So that really enabled a lot of sharing, and then a lot of integration between kind of club and national team. Obviously, kind of with the system, kind of England and the FA, it's almost flip-flopped the other way. And right now, kind of clubs, like I said previously, obviously they kind of control the programs of the players and have the players for 70-75% of the year, and then outside of that, they're with the national team. So, some of that initially is going in to meet the clubs and just starting that communication to work with them, because ultimately we want the same outcome for the players, in that we want them injury free, and we want optimizing performance so they can be available and kind of perform to the best. I think one thing we'll find initially is that the demands of maybe the WSL games are a bit lower from the intensity perspective from England national team matches. So again, it's working with the clubs to just make sure when players then come to national team, they're kind of prepared for that extra bit of load they have to face when they play international matches. But a lot of it is, like, for me, education first and foremost, like why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you asking them to do what you're doing? Why are you testing? Why is it that test? What's that going to show? What's the feedback to the player? And then that communication piece, like, what is your feedback? Is it a written report? Is it a GPS report that's sent on, WhatsApp? Again, kind of when I moved to the US 10 years ago, I looked for a platform so that I could communicate with family and friends back in England. That was, in essence, was free, and WhatsApp was what I used. So I kind of used that for kind of personal. And then when I came back to the FA, it seems that everybody in the UK uses WhatsApp as a group messaging kind of platform. So I know players get sent, GPS reports and other things through that. And all I would say is the players actually understand those programs that are being sent, or the data that's being sent. And, do you know that? And if they don't, is now a good time to educate players in terms of, what is a GPS report? What are the metrics that are showing? How does that translate to their performance? How does it translate to their position as well? Because, if we look at the intensity metrics, like your centre backs are a different breed, and that sometimes their load is dictated by what might be happening in the match, whereas other positions are more, kind of your forward, your wide positions are more about what they get involved in a match, if that makes sense. So I don't know if that answered it. I kind of went off track a few times, but like for me, just a big one is that communication, but also explanation and understanding education to the players.
Brilliant. I'm back, everyone. Sorry about that. How are you doing?
Yeah, good.
Have we still got?
Hi, Matt.
Still got Johnny. Guys, can you just fill me in on the question there that you were answering? What were you talking about?
I've just been asked about my experiences of working kind of with a national team, and I guess the communication with players and how that works. And I just expanded a little bit in terms of how it worked in the US with kind of the league and the structure over there, and then how it's kind of a little bit different, and kind of how it works a little bit back in England as well.
Cool. Johnny, anything from you to add on that? So what the question I was going to ask was kind of, before we get into what are we asking our players to do and some of the detail, I guess what does normal look like for you? What's a normal week? What would you normally be asking the players to do from a physical perspective, in addition to when they might be playing and obviously training on the field as well?
Yeah, so a normal training week for the predominant squad that I work with, the under-23s, can, because of the times at which games can be played, either being a Friday or a Monday. Sometimes you go from having a 7-day lead in, you might have a 10-day lead in, or you might have a 5-day lead in. So there's a couple of different scenarios there, Matt, in terms of the actual periodization of the week. Are you wanting me to discuss the specifics of what we do within our week, or more obviously how it relates to what we're asking the players to do now?
Well, that's where I'm getting to, really. So what's normal, and then I guess where we're going to get to in the next question is, okay, so what are you going to try and ask the players to do to make sure that you are covering your basics, if you like, the things that the must-haves, the essentials, and how are you going to ask them to do that in the home-based situation that they are? So I guess what does normal look like? And for you, this might be a bit more of an extended question, because obviously you're dealing with 9-year-olds right the way through to 23-year-olds.
Yeah. So starting from the top, then I suppose with the under 23s and the under 18s, we have your typical match day -1 being a reactivity day, match prep, set pieces. Match day -2 typically looks to be a sort of speed day or a mixed area focus day, with match day -3 and -4 being our two predominant conditioning days of the week, with small areas and large areas work, or strength and resistance, I suppose, as some people term it. In reference to the academy squads, obviously their training program is very different in relation to the amount of contact time that we actually have with them. So we try and stick to the key focuses of particularly at the upper end of the wide EP. So in terms of the 13s, 14s, 15s, 16s, about small areas, large areas for conditioning days. And then also we have you don't tend to work on set pieces at that point, but obviously there will be some element of team shape and tactically constrained games by where players work in positions. I suppose at the moment, in terms of considering what normal looks like, I suppose at the moment for our under 23 squads and under 18 squads, we're still trying to get those elements of small areas, large areas, and max velocity in. Whilst we're working towards this 30th of April, we've had a week of relative rest for the players, as it was brought up earlier through Nick. Players have gone through 25, 30 games at the moment, and if you have large squads that have got many players and few injuries, well, their conditioning work is going to differ to those of smaller squads that's had a lot of injuries, by where there's been a lot of sort of injury burden. So at the moment, a period of relative rest, and then we're going to move to hitting those key conditioning components, as I say, the small areas, the multi-directional work, acceleration, deceleration, repeated sprint work, and then obviously into large areas and max velocity, so more extensive work. So I think there was a good point earlier, Matt, I don't know if you were online at the time, just about the concern of it's all well and good, we're preparing players for coming back for the 30th, but what actually does the fixture program look like? Will there be 2 and 3 game weeks, 4 or 5 weeks, to ensure that the season's done as quickly as possible? So obviously there you've got a quick succession of games with limited recovery periods between games. So obviously we have to be mindful of that. But again, this is at the moment, this is all still unknown to us in terms of what the games program will look like, or if indeed it will start again.
Yeah. Johnny, have you had any chance over the last 10 days to kind of collaborate with some of your coaching staff? So within the academy, so it's not just providing the players with physical stimulus, right? Are you trying to kind of interact with the coaching staff and see what the overall program or support might look like for the players?
Yeah. I mean, there was a question earlier from Ben Tempest, and I'm not sure if he was meaning regarding training programs themselves, in terms of this is an opportunity to without the distractions of games, is to really develop processes and develop athleticism in some respects, if you have contact with the players. So I'm not sure if Ben was referring to the specifics of programs, but looking more holistically at the way that we develop players, as this last week or so, where the 18s and 23s have actually trained together, has been one of the really positive training weeks of the season. Now, it sounds really funny to say, but we've had a real focus on ILP work. We've had some really challenging conditioning days, which the players don't typically get a chance to do at this stage of the season. So there's been some really good collaborative work, and then obviously with that you look wider in terms of analysis and the ability to, whilst there is no distraction of games, that how can we best maximize the time and develop players holistically. So yeah, there's been collaborative work. I've spent time speaking with our head of coaching, and I think whilst this to try and look at that silver lining, really, coming out of this period of enforced break, what points are we looking to take into our practices for next season? So some people might be saying, well, actually, ILP work and putting squads together should be normal, and I would agree at some point. But yeah, we'll certainly reflect as a group of staff and think, right, what were the actual positive points of us having this period of time, and how do we ensure that next year's training processes are better than what they currently are?
Brilliant, absolutely. And for the really younger kids, is the guidance for them just to try and see if they can develop some more playful stuff? So thinking about your foundation phase kids and your early youth development phase, are you directing them towards maybe some of the more mainstream physical activity stuff? And I've seen a lot of great stuff on Twitter over the last week, for example, of people putting little skills challenges online for play. There could be some real benefit over the next few months of players really honing their ball skills, individual ball skills, technical skills that perhaps some players don't practice as often as maybe people in the past used to. Are you getting players to consider that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, whilst children at home away from school, I know there was obviously Simon Brundish mentioned about obviously taking my comment when I said about Joe Wicks being good PE. It was more just about keeping children physically active and directing them to those types of activities. But you'll have multiple children in households that now have the opportunity to play together, to obviously in the constraints of 200 meters or whatever boundaries are set. Those types of playful activities that you hear it on numerous courses and numerous sort of webinars and podcasts about kids don't do what they used to do in the olden days, but now obviously children are going to have to find a way to keep themselves yeah, sorry Simon, I knew you was half joking, but yeah, children are going to have to find themselves a way of keeping occupied as well, so that leads to creativity, whether it's like say playing in the garden, hopscotch, skipping ropes, games of TIG, inadvertent practicing of physical qualities. So yeah, I think there's going to be particularly at the young end of things. I've sort of today sent out an email directing the parents of our academy, younger academy players to certain online so that they can keep kids up to date with essentially what other children are doing around the country, and also give them a chance to be kids as well.
Absolutely. Dawn, are you still with us? I think it's just me and you at the moment.
So.
Oh, there you are. Yeah. Just any guidance, any thoughts, Dawn, in terms of guidance around maybe some of the younger players in the pathway and in the female game, and what they might be doing to help maintain or develop some of their physical and technical skills over the next couple of months?
Yeah, I mean, it's I'm not fully kind of integrated into the whole system back in England now, but I would say that kind of having had bits of contact with some of the senior players who have access to limited resources, and you see some male pro players from abroad and similar tweeting out pictures of kind of fully resourced gyms, whereas on the women's side we're kind of not. Some of it's beg, steal and borrow, and that's like your women's Super League players. So My guess is as we go down the pathway into the younger players, they've probably got limited to none. And, you know, I think, sorry, I don't know who it was speaking just right then because I just kind of came in the middle of it, but almost going back to old school of the playground and, you know, kind of bodyweight gymnastics type stuff. Again, I think that's where the education and whether it is like, you know, I know we keep saying it, but I think this is unprecedented for all of us in terms of what's going on. But I think kind of the communication, whether it's in WhatsApp groups, whether it's, you know, I know people can see it kind of on the stream are using Zoom as a platform for communication. I know there's also some apps out there are kind of offering their platforms for free for the next kind of couple of months. Things like Team Builder, and I think the Pro Game have got a platform as well, which, you know, I think in some of those, there's a couple of things on those platforms in that you can get messages, videos, activities out to kind of a large group of players or whatever, kind of in a quick amount of time. So I think, you know, using methods like that where you can also collect information back from the player, whether it is around wellness, whether it's them just completing the session that you've sent them. Again, I think on that you can be creative where, you know, the physical coach, fitness coach or technical coaches could, you know, video sessions or exercises for players to do to make sure, you know, I think the big thing is make sure their technique is okay and is safe. I think obviously other than that, it's what equipment have they got access to? Is it something where their mum might let them hold the litre of milk or whatever? You know, be resourceful in terms of adding a weight to what you're doing. I think I've seen somebody kind of in the NBA doing something like that where they were holding a gallon of milk to do kind of lunges and side lunges. You know, the use of bands. Again, what have they got access to? Have they got kind of a garden or a space outdoors to do anything? You know, if they're in the house, what space have they got in the house to do that as well? So I think some of it is flipping it and what has the player got access to, because I'm sure it's different for every single player. And then flipping it the other way, you know, have you got some kind of platform you can use with the player where you can interact with them? You know, I think that's what, you know, any kid kind of lives and breathes on their phone or iPad. So what you know, any kid kind of lives and breathes on their phone or iPad. So what you know, any kid. Can you hear me?
Yeah, keep going.
Yeah, I think it's what first and foremost, what is the player got access to? What can they safely be doing? And then, you know, have you got access to some kind of platform? Because, like I say, there are platforms out there offering their service for free with everything that's going on, at least for the next couple of months. So my thoughts would be take advantage of some of those platforms. You know, whether it's also Strava or, you know, kids these days have iWatches, so even, you know, something like that, they can track activity and things like that. So I think as much as you can make it engaging and interactive, are you setting, which obviously puts a time constraint back on us or back on you as the practitioner or the coach to, I think, take the time on the front end to set it up, but actually the payback on the back end will be you get good interaction and engagement from the players. And I think if you're either setting them targets or, you know, it could be you're, I don't know, setting them some activity they need to do and how long does it take them to do it. And, you know, I think something like that suddenly makes it, I think Nick mentioned before, like a leaderboard type thing, and makes it a bit more engaging and competitive, even though, you know, with 20 kids, they're in 20 different houses. So I think as much as you can, kind of making it more engaging and interactive rather than just sending out something which is a plan they do on their own. I think if it's engaging and interactive, you'll kind of get good, you know, better buy-in as well. I actually, my sister's a primary school teacher, so kind of 4 or 5-year-old, and she teaches in Amsterdam, and she's just come back because of what's going on, and like she makes videos for the players, and then the kids send in videos back of them doing the activity of what she's asked them to do. So, you know, I just think learning from the profession who teaches those kids on a day-to-day basis as well, in terms of anything like that, that makes it more interactive and appealing for the player. I think it'll give you kind of a better kind of impact on the back end of that.
Definitely. And I think
Matt, just to jump in there.
Go on then.
Yeah, sorry. No, I was just going to say there's. I've just reading a couple of the comments coming in as well, and I think picking up from what Dawn said there. You know, what better way to sort of test and assess the learning and actually our influence on the players by, you know, asking them to engage back with us. You know, I think Dave Carolan used the word spoon-fed. You know, these players, you know, particularly the older they get, you know, in towards the PDP phase, it's this is what they want to do for a living. This is what they perceive their job to be in the future. So, but then you go right down to the younger age groups. What better outcome for us as a performance staff if we were to get some feedback from the players that, you know, or a video that, you know, one of our under 10 or 11s has created a home-based workout for him and his family, you know, a way to re-engage with the family, to spend time with his family, quality time, have fun, and also for us to do they understand what it is that we're trying to do with them? Have they used any of the skills and techniques and the exercises that we've used with them at the club? And I think there's some real great option for social interaction with what players can do.
Nick,
I don't know if it's
I think so. I'm just checking to see if we are or not.
You are, Nick.
I'm back. Yeah. Sorry, I haven't been much of a contributor, to be honest. I've had internet problems all day, but I've managed to get on by phone, so I'll try and do my best for the rest of it.
Go for it, Dawn. Sorry.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to say, like, I don't know what I've missed out on then. In terms of like the interaction and monitoring of kind of the older players, like the senior players, you know, I think as much as we talk about for the younger players, you know, going back to movements that probably in our day and age, I'm probably older than most of you, we did back in the day in the playground and stuff like that. I think for the older players, you know, they're not going to have their own individual GPS trackers, but, you know, I think most players these days have got, you know, an Apple iWatch, whatever you call it, I don't know, but an Apple Watch or, you know, Garmin or even a Polar Watch. And, you know, I think based on now their kind of session rate and whether it's on their RPE or actually looking at, you know, what is their heart rate load. I think with the evolving of GPS, like 20 years ago, we kind of were looking at heart rates and then we were like, well, okay, we've got the internal load, but what is the external load? So we now introduced kind of GPS and then we went away from using heart rates. And I know Casey Stoney's on this call and she'll probably laugh at this, but, you know, 15, 16 years ago with England senior women, like the players would have their own heart rate watch and, you know, some of them called it their personal trainer and they kind of went off of that in terms of the intensity of their session. So, you know, players do have their kind of iWatch and yes, it's not 100% accurate because it's collecting heart rate based on the wrist pulse, but at least it is starting to give you a bit of a measure of, you know, what the heart rate load is for a player when they go out during that kind of one time in the day when they can go out and do some kind of exercise outside. You can almost get some of the GPS load from that watch, but then also definitely that heart rate load. And I think then the education piece of what is heart rate, what does it mean, what zones are in, what's the max heart rate, you know, I think is another way that we can make some big gains. And, you know, selfishly for me on the women's side, I think that's where we could make some big gains over these next few weeks and actually get some good heart rate loads out of there for players.
Definitely. Nick, I'm going to start to kind of wind this up over the next 5 minutes or so, but, you know, what a question I'm going to pose to you all, and what I'll do as well is mention to people who are listening in, can you start to put in the comments box some ideas of things that we maybe want further conversation about, because there's certainly ground that I would have liked to have covered, and with the technical glitches, etc. I think we'll do some more of this if people would be interested in try and do it without people's internet breaking down and things like that. So start putting comments in about what else we might want to cover. But last question to the guys for tonight really is, you know, what are the big tickets that you'd like your players to be focusing on? And I get the idea that people should be owning their own fitness, but in terms of the guidance that you're going to give your players, what are the big ticket activities that you're going to ask your players to do, or that you think you'd like your players to be doing, so that when we do get the season back up and running, or the pre-season back up and running, you know, the detrimental effects of being away from training or being away from playing football is minimised. What you're going to go after? I'll start with you first, Johnny, and then Nick, and then Dawn. You can chip something in if you've got anything else to add. Johnny?
Yes. So I think with the older end academy, I think we're obviously looking to try and, obviously if we're talking about maintaining the season and finishing the season off, we need to ensure that players are as fit as possible. You know, and in that respect, you know, having had a week of relative rest, that we you know, as I mentioned earlier, we focus work around the conditioning elements of our program. As we said, you know, the tactical and technical aspects need to be probably a little bit more creative. So I would suggest, obviously, the 18s and 23s, we need to look at them conditioning elements. 15s, 16s, you know, obviously one of the big, I know there's a couple of comments mentioning about retain release, and you know, some clubs may have decisions on players already, and I think that's a really interesting point about.
Have we lost him? Yeah, he's jumped off. Nick, do you want to jump in and talk about your stuff? What you're thinking, the big tickets that you want your players to focus on?
Yeah, I mean, the main ones for us is maintaining as much of the aerobic fitness that we've developed over the season. It's just trying to maintain that. Whether you give them a little period of recovery first, which they've almost had now, and then start building it back towards into a periodised plan, aiming towards the date that we've still got. I've been able to listen to most of the stuff, you just couldn't hear me, but so people have talked about maintaining other physical qualities such as speed, which I think is really important, obviously from an injury prevention point of view, but as well as a performance point of view. So elements to put into that, and then the other end of what you would say, somebody said it earlier on, which I quite agreed with, which is almost like you're into the middle to back end of an off-season program, where you're looking at the end period of your sort of general physical preparedness plan. You know, the higher end aerobic work, making sure that they've still been maintaining the strength works that they'll set. I know that you've got to be creative around that, depending on who and what sort of equipment they've got. You know, ideas around that, doing an inventory. You know, each player, what have they got? Then you can send them individual programs to try and maintain that area of it. And then we're all just waiting upon on when and what sort of level of connection we can get with them. If it's going to continue to be at home, then you'll have to be creative with your programs to progress that as it is, and also be creative with your monitoring programs.
Great. Dawn, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think similar. Obviously, the programs are being driven by the WSL clubs. I think, like Nick mentioned there, I think it would be see what individual players have got from an equipment perspective. You know, I think Steph Horton posted an image today where, you know, she's doing a loaded back squat, and she's got this might sound bad from a height perspective, but she's got the bar just kind of rested up on two wheelie bins. But it's, you know, it's being creative. It's obviously safe up there. But you know, I think see what each player's got from an inventory perspective, and then tailor the program to them. Like, you know, if you've got screening data on your players, can players then focus on any individual? You know, if they've got a kind of injury history or anything like that, you know, is there something individual they can focus on? And then, you know, I think given that we can go out once a day, you know, I think really making the most of those sessions. And I think, again, like you said, keeping on top of especially kind of speed type work, you know, kind of high speed type running sessions, and being a bit creative with them, again, depending on what the player has access to. Is it a pitch? Is it a, you know, just literally a street or a road that they're going out? And, you know, I think the flip side of that is too much road running is obviously going to put a lot of stress through kind of knees, ankles, lower limbs. So I think just being mindful of that, but seeing what individual needs are from the player's perspective. I think, again, like everybody said, and it's not rocket science, obviously the biggest thing players are going to lose is kind of, you know, I'm sure they've all got a ball and can go out and get some kind of functional ball touches, but they're obviously not going to get any opposed work and definitely no match play. So, you know, I think anything we can do to be able to accelerate that process once we can get back out there fully kind of engaged on the pitch, you know, is important. I think from a national team perspective, we've been doing kind of a deep dive into the She Believes tournament from a technical, physical perspective, and just kind of collating some good kind of feedback between us to then just contact clubs and just give them a debrief of the tournament, and then kind of once we've done that, give players individual feedback on that, which again is an engagement piece of like sharing that information in a constructive way, so that players can, you know, take on board some of that feedback and try and then learn from it and kind of build from that as well. So yeah, that's kind of where I go with that.
Brilliant. And although in some ways, you know, I think the way that we summarise this is that there's been some great discussions had. There's been some wonderful comments that have been made throughout the webinar as well, and I'm certainly going to use the recording to make sure that I go back and I can scan through all the comments that have been made as well by people. You know, we are in challenging times in some instances, some respects, but I think there's some great opportunities, particularly for some of the younger players, to possibly focus in some of the technical aspects of individual players, some of the physical stuff. They can really hone in on some of the physical development that they maybe can't focus in on and spend as much time on in the club. And of course there will be challenges, particularly at the senior end, when we do kind of get back into play, about ramping back up into a relatively short pre-season and then maybe into a really congested season games programme, and how do we support the players with that. And maybe that's something that we can all reconvene and discuss at another time. Thank you to the presenters. Go on, yeah, go for it.
Sorry, just one other thing I'm kind of meant to throw in, which I think could apply across the ages, is almost like yoga or Pilates for players. I think which can hit many outcomes from a stretch and recovery, from a mental kind of perspective, but even then from a, especially kind of Pilates, from a strengthening kind of flexibility perspective as well. So again, we had some kind of good Pilates, which either was a recovery flow session, was a strengthening session, and then various yoga ones. So again, you know, I've got a few links for them if anybody wanted any of those shared, and you know, they vary from anywhere from 10 minutes to 30 minutes. So again, I think from a mental perspective, but then also recovery or kind of physical development, I think are a useful thing to kind of focus on right now, and just look after your body as much as training it. Because I think
there's
that's
some great videos on YouTube such as that, just as simple as that that I'll watch. Yeah. You just said to the, you know, you find them, you put links up, put them again, what we're saying, using these WhatsApp groups that you can set up for your players. You put links on and say, yeah, lads, you've got 15-20 minutes in the afternoon, do this. You know, we've set you your program for the morning to do. You can do this in the house. You know, at the moment they're only allowed to go out for one run, so you know, they have to stick to them rules. So you've got to take that into account when you're programming for them, for the sessions that you want them to complete. But there's no reason why they can't do the other stuff in at home, you know, and adding those little things in are things that can help alleviate the boredom for them.
Yeah, totally.
Brilliant. Guys, thank you very much. Thank you for everyone else for bearing with us as well. There's been some great discussion. There was a comment made there about, is there somewhere else we could maybe set up a forum to continue the discussions? I'll speak to my colleagues back at the FA about that, but certainly from the richness of this and the conversation and the comments that have been made, hopefully we'll be able to put some more things like this on as this period of isolation and change continues. But for now, thank you all very much and good night.
Thank you, guys. Stay safe, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.